Arab Organization for Human Rights in the UK. Today is the 76th day of war in Gaza. At least 20,000 Palestinians were killed and over 50,000 injured, and thousands are still lost under the rubble. Academicians and activists and even politicians have proved that what is happening in Gaza is a full-fledged genocide, but some voices are still undermining the bigger picture and discussing the details of the legal implications of the word itself, and had failed many nations before. Today it is failing Palestinians as well. So we will dive into the reasons why no one has been held accountable yet, and methods for providing legal redress to the victims and ensuring accountability for Israelis accused of war crimes. Each guest will have 3 minutes. We will start with your input into this subject, and then we will start a discussion where we can discuss the insights that were mentioned. So, so we will start with Professor Dan Kovalik. He is an American professor and human rights lawyer. Thank you for joining us today, Dan.
Thank you. Can you see me okay?
Now it's spinning.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that. Sorry. Okay. Great. First of all, thank you very, very much for having me today. I'm very honored to be here. For me, the question of Palestine is the most pressing issue in the world today, by far. I actually just returned from the West Bank, where I was doing, I was there, one, to pay witness to what's happening, and also doing research on the increased repression by Israel in the West Bank, which obviously is not getting quite as much attention as Gaza for, reasons understood, of course. But since the question is, why aren't the nations of the world invoking the Genocide Convention? I think obviously there's different reasons for different countries. Obviously, the West, led by the United States and Israel, have a, obviously they want to avoid the word genocide. They want to claim this is not a genocide because they have fears of prosecution, of course. My own view is that someone like Joe Biden could be easily prosecuted for aiding and abetting genocide in this case. And in fact, you may or may not know, the Center for Constitutional Rights in the United States has brought a lawsuit against the Biden administration, alleging that they are liable for aiding and abetting genocide in Gaza. And of course, the U.S. is a party to the Genocide Convention, as most countries are. And therefore, under the U.S. Supremacy Clause of the Constitution, that it is binding upon us domestically. It is domestic law, which people like Joe Biden and others are obligated to abide by. So obviously, the West fears, criminal prosecution. Now, why are other countries not invoking it? Why aren't the Arab states invoking it? Or countries even in Latin America like Colombia and Bolivia and Venezuela, which have been very outspoken against what's happening in Gaza have used the word genocide. Certainly, my friend President Gustavo Petro of Colombia has said it's a genocide. But so far, no one has taken the step that some are advocating and that I advocated of going to the International Court of Justice for a finding that it is a genocide, which would require action under the Genocide Convention. The Genocide Convention requires that all states are obligated to act to prevent and stop a genocide. So if a finding of genocide were found by the International Court of Justice, it would be incumbent on every state that's a party to the Genocide Convention to do something to stop it. Why aren't states that are even critical of Israel doing that? That is hard for me to fathom, to be honest, except that maybe they fear that if they do that to Israel, that others will go after them for other things, right? That they fear some sort of reciprocation. But of course, that's what international law is based on, is reciprocation. That is to say that international law protects all of us, right? And it protects states too. And we want it to protect all states equally. The problem is it does not under the current system.
Yes.
Right? The International Criminal Court has utterly abdicated its role in this conflict. Yeah. They should have indicted Benjamin Netanyahu for genocide. They should do that now. They should indict Joe Biden.
I think we should keep it short as much as possible. So that.
Oh, okay. I was told I had 7 minutes. So
I have 3 minutes.
Okay. Oh, am I done then? Okay. So I guess I'll just end there. But I will say, since I didn't say it, I do believe, as others have said, this is a textbook case of genocide, and that convention does need to be invoked. And I'm happy to help anyone who wants to find a way to do that. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you for your input, Dan. So now we'll move on to Lamis. She's a lawyer and expert in international human rights law. Lamis, the floor is yours.
No problem. I thought I had requested to go last. Can you see me? And can you hear me?
We can hear you, but we cannot see you yet.
Okay, let's try this. Now?
Same problem. Yes, that's
okay. Tamam, can you restate the question? Because I was also under the impression that I had 7 minutes to go towards the end of the session, but I'm happy to step in. Can you restate the question?
Thank you. So the question is basically, why haven't anyone held Israel accountable for its war crimes and tried it for genocide in Gaza? And what are the legal roadblocks surrounding this case?
So yeah, it's hard to synthesize that for me in 3 minutes. I do want to clarify, I'm not an international law, human rights expert. I am an internationally practicing attorney who works in several sectors, but neither here nor there. I did want to clarify that. And I wanted, and I hoped that we would have time to discuss the marriage and the role of the private sector and the national sector, national laws, regional laws, administrative, civil, criminal laws on the domestic sector, which leads into what is the problem and why hasn't there been a prosecution. It's not just a matter of prosecution of genocide now. Aside from the fact that Zionist Israeli settler colonialism is itself inherently genocidal, the Zionist entity has engaged in express articulation of intention to genocide. This is dating back to the inception of the Zionist entity in the 40s, and then repeatedly again since 2009 vis-a-vis Gaza from top Israeli commanders. One of the primary reasons, well, I'm going to go through a few and then cut me off if you have to, but I think that it's important to discuss this, is number one, the framework which has allowed these war crimes to begin and continue has not changed. The legal framework and the discursive framework has not changed, and rather has been strengthened for the purpose of strengthening Israeli war crimes and the whole gamut of them, number one. Number two, our reliance on a recalcitrant, weak, politicized and hostage international system, everything from the UN to the ICC. And this is underscored by Gutierrez's statement, which was, ironic, if not, I don't want to criticize it too much, but he said something to the effect of the Geneva Conventions and international humanitarian law appears to have been time warped by 80 years. Well, what a coincidence that this time warp matches the timeline of the Zionist entity. And what this is really is an admission of what has become of the international system created by way of the exception to international law, to the Geneva Conventions, to the Genocide Convention, the exception of Palestine, right, which has, not just by precedent, but by acts and facts and law, has allowed the Western world to not only violate, but to facilitate and incite the violation of the Geneva Conventions for themselves and for those whom they seek to protect while subjecting the rest of the world. So he is accurate, he's right. It is a time warp because it was never implemented. And when you have an exception, you create a precedent. The other thing that he said was that these structures, the international structures, are insufficiently strong. They're too weak. And again, that's accurate. For several years now, international attorneys and other interested parties have been discussing the possibility of the reformulation of the structure of the United Nations, including the UN Security Council and their relationships with other organizations and units within the United States. This has happened, and I do want to please, for a moment, look, I'd like to take an extra minute. Look, the hyper-privileging into law and policy of Zionism and Zionists and Israel, right, is part one that needs to be addressed in a multidisciplinary, multifaceted way in society, right? The trauma supremacy of Zionists, right, of Israelis, which erases psychologically and legally Palestinian suffering, Palestinian oppression, Palestinians facing genocide. And number three, the legal and political and discursive criminalization of Palestinians and the Palestinian resistance and the dehumanization of Palestinians en masse. These are three areas that appear to be political, but are very legal frameworks that need to be addressed, which is why in this meeting that I spoke about before we opened the session, we are looking to say, we understand the human rights attorneys and the human rights fields are very important, but this, in order to be effective, needs to feed into the private, national, regional sectors, into other forums. And what we're looking at is the marriage of these two fields of law. People call me a human rights attorney, but what does that mean? I'm not at the UN, I'm not at the ICC, I can't be at the ICC, I can file there, but there's no trial to happen. So what I do when I represent, and I've represented multinational corporations and former government officials around issues of quote unquote terrorism and sanctions, national security. And what we need to start doing is looking at the case of Palestine, yes, from the lens of international humanitarian law, but also from the lens of these other really powerful frameworks, the terrorism framework, the sanctions framework, right? The Nakba framework, which needs to be developed, bringing all of this, giving it teeth, right? When we say terrorism, it's not just, it's not going to the ICC or the ICJ. When we say terrorism, it's federal criminal, it's regional, it's Interpol, right? It's civil, it's commercial. Right. And we have, especially in the private sector, we have these tools to understand and pursue, number one, other forums where we can actually implement. A lot of these cases are beautiful and they're wonderful. Ultimately, they'll be ineffective. So looking at other forums which can act more efficiently, more powerfully, and more quickly, looking at other judicial devices, declaratory judgments, preemptive decisions, many things that we intend to structure. And of course, pursuing the ICJ more powerfully. And I'm done. It's all yours.
Yeah, we will have enough time at the end when we're discussing, and we will hear more from you. Thank you so much for your valuable insight. So now we move on to Dr. Lex Takkenberg. He's a senior advisor with Arab Renaissance for Democracy and Development. Thank you for joining us, Professor. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and very happy to join the event today. Just a couple of brief remarks from my side to add to the previous speakers. Indeed, we have after over 10 weeks since the war started on the 7th of October, we have an abundance of prima facie and other evidence of genocide and ethnic cleansing, which is closely related in that in that the act of genocide seems to be primarily intended by Israel to further ethnically cleanse Palestinians from historic Palestine, and starting on this occasion with the Gaza Strip, and increasingly also with the West Bank. So we have an abundance of evidence of both intent, genocidal, and intent aimed at ethnic cleansing, as well as actions on the ground. I mean, the bombings, the evacuation orders, the systemic attacks of public infrastructure, hospitals, schools, water reservoirs, solar panels, and etc. So there's a lot of evidence, and yet legal action seems to be slow. This is partly inherent, I believe, in sort of the use of courts and measures of legal action to enforce accountability. Partly also because of the relatively premature or undeveloped state of the mechanism of international accountability. When I studied international law 30 years ago or 35 years ago, I remember very well my professor saying, dear students, the 20th century was the era of codification of international law, and the 21st century is that of enforcement, and that's going to be your job, young lawyers, and so there's partly the state that the ICC is still relatively young. The experience of the ICJ with respect to genocide is still fairly limited. So there's this structural element. Then there's the element that the other speakers have alluded to, the strong politicization. So what do we need to do? And I believe that all efforts have to be on the accountability. That's the only thing that is going to stop Israel and its enablers, which are not sort of sensitive to moral considerations and sort of look the other way in the face of all the evidence that is visible on our TV screens. So all focus on accountability, which entails ongoing pressure on the office of the prosecutor, and there has been a lot of pressure on Khan in different contexts, and that just needs to continue as loud and clear as possible. And then indeed, one of your main inquiries for today's webinar is, why has the ICJ not been used as an instrument to hold Israel and its enablers to account? One important factor there is of course the ongoing pressure by the United States and Israel, that unfortunately seems to have scared a lot of states away of sort of taking this step. What Gambia did vis-a-vis Myanmar and the Rohingya is a step that so far has not been taken by any other state party to the convention until this moment. Also here, pressure needs to continue, and and pressure by civil society is critical in that aspect, in that respect.
Yes.
And certainly also the use of national court. Lama already referred to that. I mean, this is also a tremendous potential for holding perpetrators of war crimes and crimes against humanity to account, and needs to be pursued more systematically. And I can make a few further comments about that later in the webinar.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Takkenberg. So actually one of our guests had to leave because Israeli occupying forces are around the office. Shahd Qaddura, pray for her. So now we'll move on to our next guest, Dr. Filiz Değer. She's a Turkish lawyer specializing in the international humanitarian law. And just a reminder, we have 3 minutes for each speaker, and at the end of the webinar, we'll have time to discuss. Yes, the floor is yours, Dr. Filiz.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I'd like to say how deeply saddened by crimes, humanitarian disaster in Palestine. I'd like to say, first of all, before October 7, after October 7, what's the difference between this date? Before October 7, there was a humanitarian collective punishment. But after 7 October, there is mass destruction in Palestine because the ethical codes of Israel Defense Forces, if you are a civilian with their enemies and you are also enemies, the reason why civilian targets bombed means genocide and leaving no place for civilians to return to. I'd like to point out that human rights is common value and that unites all humanity, but states and not states actors are destabilize the implementation of human rights. We can say Gaza combatants use their right of self-defense against Israel on October 7. War crimes are being committed in Palestine that are not justified proportionally and necessity. In the situation, the use of veto right in the UN Security Council to maintain a status quo and UN General Assembly not recommending the collective legitimate force based on 377 and also the International Criminal Court not considering the death of thousands of people as a sufficient reason to issue an arrest. This is not a humanitarian disaster that the UN cannot manage. This is called abuse of law. We can say lawfare in this situation. And International Court of Justice, ICJ, will discuss the legal consequences of Israel's action in Palestine on February 19. But due to violation of genocide convention, ICJ may decide legal matter of violation and scope of damage. Notification is made to UN General Assembly according to Article 94 UN Charter. States undertake to comply with decision of court. If doesn't comply, measures may be taken by Security Council. The problem is here because when Security Council decision about measures in the situation, veto right may be used. Security Council can take measures according to Article 94 or Chapter 7 of UN Charter. The use of veto may prevent measures from being taken. Thank you. Listening, my Ruiz.
Thank you very much for your review. So now we will move on to Mr. Joseph Reid Milburn. He's a lawyer and expert in international law. Just a reminder, 3 minutes, and then we'll move on to the next speaker, and at the end we will have a full discussion. Mr. Joseph, do you hear us? I think
he has a technical problem. We can move to next speaker.
Yeah. Okay, so Mr. Rami Shah. let's move on to Mr. Rami Shad then. Welcome to our webinar. He is a Palestinian Egyptian activist and human rights defender. What is your take on this matter, Mr. Rami?
Hello, everybody, and great that you're having the seminar at the time of a continuous genocide in Palestine. I think personally, I have very little faith in the ICJ. I have very little faith in all the institutions that were built after the World War II that is based on an imbalanced power and a power of control. I am a strong believer of local jurisdictions, and I think I am now based in France. We're looking at many possible cases in France, but that can also be in different places in the world. We're looking at cases of genocide related to especially or an entry using Palestinians who have dual nationalities. That might be an entry for local courts. We're looking into cases regarding the thousands of mercenaries that have been shipped from different parts of the world to kill Palestinians and join the Israeli forces, the occupation forces in genocide. We're looking at cases against them and against the carriers that took them and allowed them to join forces. We're looking at cases regarding the companies that facilitated that or facilitated Israeli procurement of arms or spare parts for arms. We're looking at cases of NGOs that supposedly supports humanitarian issues, but in reality, they have declared support for military-related equipment, facilities, or training in Israel against local laws. So I think we have a range of cases that we can start with. I am very interested in the ICJ. We are working closely here with the Gill and the other groups that are trying to collect forces for the ICJ. But we know the corruption behind Mr. Khan. We've heard his words, we've heard his actions. We've seen when he went to Palestine meeting survivors of genocide and gave them 10 minutes, all of them, to speak while give 2 days to an Israeli version of the story. So we're seeing the clear intent in trying to suppressing our push for an ICJ base. But I agree, we need to gather forces. We need to lay the groundwork. Only a few days ago, FIDH was the first to declare what's happening in Palestine a genocide. I think we need to pressure Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, and other groups to do the same. And with a growing groundwork that would pressure the ICJ into taking it more seriously. I think we have a lot of work to do locally and on ground basis before we can pressure an ICJ deliberation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shad, for your input. So we have Mr. Joseph Reid Milburn with us. Can you hear us? Hello? Mr. Milburn, can you hear us? I guess, okay.
I think
Right.
he has technical issue. Okay.
Yes.
Sania, just 1 second. 1 second, we'll try to solve the problem now.
Okay.
Could you try to open your mic, please? You have access now. Okay.
Ask to
Okay, I will try to solve that now.
Okay, now I can.
Yes,
Yeah.
great.
All right. Hey, now, yes, and can you give me access to the
Yes,
video?
we can hear you, but can you switch off your camera, please? Which one your camera?
No, I turned it on. Okay, now you can.
Great. Yes.
Yes.
So first off, I want to make it clear that I'm not an expert in international law. I do work at CARE Chicago, which is the Chicago office of the nation's largest Muslim advocacy group. And as their staff attorney, I have been seeing an influx of cases from Gaza trying to apply for asylum. And the reason why I'm bringing this up as relevancy is that one rule or one factor to obtaining asylum is you have to be able to show that you cannot internally relocate, right? And it's a key importance with people applying from Gaza because it's very difficult for Palestinians from the West Bank to get permits to enter 48, but it's even more difficult for Palestinians from Gaza to get permits to enter 48 or to even go to the West Bank. It's interesting because
the sound is not very clear. The camera is.
If a Palestinian from the West Bank wants to move to Gaza for, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I'm in Tunisia right now. But anyways, what I was saying is that Israel, if a Palestinian from the West Bank wants to move to Gaza, Israel will make it very easy for a Palestinian to do that. But it is very difficult, if not almost impossible, for a Palestinian from Gaza to move to the West Bank, which kind of, in a way, shows that Israel is intending Gaza to, in effect, be an open-air prison, whereas it's very difficult to enter, even more difficult to leave. And that tells us, a lot that we need to know about Gaza. The second thing that is, interestingly enough, which I've noticed in law, is that in America, it's considered illegal to join a foreign army, yet we see tons of Jewish Americans joining the IDF. Earlier today, I was on Facebook, and I even saw a case of Ukrainian mercenaries that are now in Gaza, which I have to find it amusing, considering that Ukraine is supposedly under occupation by Russia. Why anyone under occupation would support another occupation is amusing to me. It doesn't change the fact that for some reason, a lot of countries who may have laws against joining foreign armies somehow turn a blind eye when it comes to joining the Israeli army, even if it's just to fight as a mercenary. And, with those factors in line, considering that Gazans cannot internally relocate, they can't. Gaza, I live in Chicago, so Gaza is even smaller than the size of Chicago. If you're trying to apply for asylum, you have to show that you have fear that you'll be harmed or tortured if you'll be returned. Yeah. So Gaza, considering that Gaza is smaller than the size of Chicago, if someone was trying to kill you in Gaza, you're pretty easy to find, considering how small of an enclave it is. It's mind-boggling to me that the West does not consider, even though it is true that Israel has broken every human rights violation out there, it's mind-boggling to me that Israel is able to get away with being the one place people can join if they're not from that country to join their army. And two, the fact that Gaza is literally an open-air prison makes it ironically easier for Gazans to apply for asylum based on the fact that they can't relocate to 48 or the West Bank. If you try to apply for asylum from another country, you have to show why you can't move to another part. Well, if you're from Gaza, you can't move to another part of Palestine. You're stuck there, essentially.
Yeah. Joseph, our time is limited. So our discussion today was about the persecution of Israel for genocide.
Yes.
And
I know.
Yes, I can see that you're building up to that. So
yes,
because we have 2 more minutes and then we will be at discussion. So yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Sorry, ma'am. So where I was getting, with that when it comes to the genocide factor of this is it's the mind-boggling question that we're all wondering is why Israel has not been brought to the ICC yet. We saw the cases with the Bosnian genocide. We saw the case with the Rwandan genocide. But the question is why no formal charges have been brought against Israel under similar circumstances. And I appreciate everyone's time. I know that I'm not an expert on international law. I'm very flattered to be here with the likes of many, including Ms. Lamis Deek, but I would say that I'm very grateful for the opportunity I had to speak for a few minutes.
Yeah, thank you very much. Sorry for having to cut you, but we will have a discussion now. And of course, you can join in. Your input was very interesting. So now, having heard from everyone's point, we can now move on to a discussion on if you have something to say for what some other speaker has already mentioned. In general, we have been discussing all the legal implications so far. So if any of you has steps that can be taken or suggestions to move closer to the ultimate subject, to the ultimate goal of trying Israeli officials for the crime of genocide, or trying settlers even, because as there is a genocide unrolling in Gaza, there's also crimes against humanity and war crimes happening as we speak in the West Bank as well. So the floor is yours. I think Ms. Lamis has something to add, had something to add when she was still talking. So if you want to, Lamis, can you hear us?
Yes, sorry, I would have liked to hear more from others, but maybe I'll take this moment. Rami, you said you're based in France and you've coordinated with Gill. Gill was at this meeting. We couldn't get a hold of an invite. It was a short meeting, but I actually want to continue a little bit from where Joe left off. You know, Joe, a colleague of mine is the special prosecutor, one of the special prosecutors on the Rwanda tribunals. And you know what? There hasn't been a single prosecution to date. In fact, many of the intended defendants have died before they will ever see a trial happen. I think that the road, look, at this meeting, and I'm speaking to the general public, but especially to the attorneys, the practicing attorneys here, at this meeting, which I think is quite an epic and inshallah historic in terms of what it will produce with your participation, especially those in this field. Number one, we had to make the admission that what's been happening in the legal sector, because we don't have a centrally represented, clear, number one, political voice and leadership on Palestine. Number two, the role and voice of Palestinians in general. And so one of the most critical things that we did at this convening is to say that all of this work needs to be coordinated, discursively brought into the legal domain, Palestinian self-determination and the demands of popular Palestinian democratic will, which is in whatever formulation moving forward we have it, is a demand for liberation, which interpreted into legal or political language, what does liberation means, right? Justice, accountability, and dismantlement of all Zionist supremacist institutions of violence, whether that's cultural violence, war crimes, etc. Return, reparations, and restitution. Right. So number one, ensuring that there isn't a schizophrenic legal narrative or discourse that's being, proliferated everywhere, but there is, even if it comes in the form of dicta, there is the framing of the Palestinian issue in this way, number one. Number two, is this the marriage of the international world, this recalcitrant, lazy, politicized exception and really hostage system with the private system, which Rami has raised. This is our greatest area of interest, actually, and where we are sure we can probably see prosecutions, if not in the criminal, at least in the civil sense, but also in the financial sector. People underestimate the financial and the regulatory sector, which is why I'm saying we need to look at this genocide in the same framework and to use the framework of terrorism, to use the genocide as a framework for then going for all those layers of society that have actively participated in mobilizing, aiding, abetting genocide in Palestine, meaning also in the civil sector of Western society. As an attorney who practices in these sorts of fields and disciplines, I guarantee you we're going to see more. Looking at Interpol, but also moving outside of the concept that it's only in these Western countries that we have avenues and forums. That is not true, right? We are seeing the rise of the global South and of the East. And I have to tell you, we've begun doing the jurisdictional surveys. We are quite hopeful. And in this, I'm adding the media. And so through this coordination, one of the heaviest things, and I'm making this more of an organization, through this coordination, we have, Rami, I can't imagine how much you have, Dan, as you as well. One of the most difficult parts is the fact statement and the evidence gathering, which the human rights lawyers have really been at the forefront of. And what we're saying is feed this into the private sector, multinational and even regional legal operations that are being launched and will be launched at a more forceful scale, number one. Let us coordinate in a way that we have this legal incrementalism. For example, if you're in France and I'm in America and we've got cases, we can cross share our goals for discovery, right? For example, and this becomes something tremendous. Get these incremental judgments in place. I think it's very important to delegitimize Israeli society, Zionist society that has allowed this to happen. One thing we don't talk about is how Oslo has facilitated the legitimization of obscenely illegal war criminal structures built by the Zionist entity. Their judicial system really needs to be addressed and named for what it is. And this has to happen in the legal domain, right?
Yes.
These are not prisons. So I'm sorry. So the coordination and this understanding of our power outside the reliance on the international systems, which are an administrative nightmare before they're a political nightmare, right? I think is critical. And so in all of this is to say all the people here are invited. Many of your colleagues have committed. This is an alliance of coalitions which want to come up with a clear or well-articulated, well-coordinated, permanent coordination of this work, which we are certain is going to create a more powerful legal intervention for Palestine and a preemptive one as well. And there's more to share. And I look forward to hearing from you if somebody will connect us. And I thank you all for your work and for having us.
Yes, thank you. It's very interesting how you broke down the crime of genocide itself and how every part of it should be actually persecuted, be it terrorism, etc. And also the idea of coordinating and making an alliance so that all lawyers and can have actually access to proof, so that everyone can move together. So, Mr. Dan. What is your say on this?
Well, first of all, I like the ideas that have been expressed here. I mean, I still have some hope in going to the ICJ. Of course, it would require only one state to do that. Yeah. And I would think there are some countries that we could prevail upon to do that. I would think Iran would be interested. Again, Colombia, which has been maybe one of the most outspoken against the genocide there, possibly Nicaragua or Cuba.
Malaysia and South Africa are actively considering, and there's been a lot of discussion.
Yeah, and just to add in, I think a few of us might already be in discussion with government. Certainly our team is, and we're happy to bring others in discussion and to expand. So I don't want to cut you off, but yes, 100%. And we're here to help, anybody who wants to do this work, anybody who is doing this work, and those who want to come into this work.
Great. Yeah, so that's my thought, that I think that from an international law perspective, at least that makes sense, and at least makes sense to really try. So that's it. And, we do, but I also like this idea of sharing information with lawyers. As I mentioned, there is this domestic lawsuit in the United States against Joe Biden. It's in the Ninth Circuit, which is a more kind of progressive circuit in the United States out west in California. Alleging aiding and abetting with genocide. And again, I think that has some real teeth because the U.S. is bound by the Genocide Convention. And again, I think, I don't know if people have seen the pleadings, but they're very, very compelling. Mm. And I think there could be some avenue there as well.
Yes. So other than the circuit of countries, obviously, there's also the local circus and, the local circuit. And what local communities can do as well. And Mr. Rami actually mentioned, this is a very important point. Although now we're still dealing with, people are still hurting, people are still dying as we speak, but still people outside can also do something and can move towards bringing justice to the victims of Gaza.
If I may. Well, it's a there is a lot of difficulties we are working on. I would definitely love what Mr. Lamis said and others, that we can start coordinating. We are part of a bigger alliance in France today with a Palestinian core in it, that we have a legal arm with many pro bono lawyers that are who are willing to support local cases, but also looking into evidence gathering. We have a lot of media evidence that can be investigated regarding genocide in Palestine, but very little gathering of evidence on the ground. We are putting on a team today to try to work in the ground in Gaza in documenting not only testimonies, but also samples, forensic in special sectors. One of it that will support any ICJ future, but would also support possible local cases. Today in France, we have 150 survivors of genocide Palestinians from Gaza who arrived to France, a lot of them with a French nationality, and a lot of them have been subject to genocide. Them, their families, their belongings, and their forced displacement. So I think we have a major possible entry into French courts. We need to amplify that with the evidence gathering, but also with a stronger mapping of a chain of command, which armed group of the Israeli terrorist army were in which area at what time, so you can exactly locate the right officers with the chain of command that leads up to. That's important for any court case. We're working on issues like that. We are also in contact with few countries, some of the ones you have mentioned that are interested in taking it to the ICJ, but there's others who yet do not want to declare themselves, who we're talking to. That's also a possibility. Again, my problem was not finding enough countries to take it to the ICJ. I think it's the will, it's the intimidation of the US government and Israel that disallow international accountability in the right way. I'm going to concentrate personally on local levels. I will concentrate on crimes in many different fields. For example, in France today, we're looking at possible 200 cases of people who came on French TV saying things that would be considered inciting genocide, not only the government, but also journalists, members of parliament, and normal people in many different ways. I think we need accountability on every level, from the mercenaries that have been shipped there to the people who incited genocide on TV to the actual genocide in Palestine, locally and internationally. And I'm very happy to coordinate with anybody who's doing the same work. We can do much better work together.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Mr. Takkenberg, yes.
Yeah. Can I also come in on the and I completely underscore Lamis' call for effective coordination, and the previous speaker was also referring to that. I mean, this is critical, and important elements of it are already in place, and we at ARDD in Jordan have been advocating also for the establishment of a legal activism working group, a working group of attorneys both in national jurisdictions, partnered with international legal experts who can coordinate their work. And normally we don't like to sort of copycat and pick on each other's work. But in this case, as I think Lamis also mentioned, you can copy each other's arguments and use evidence and statements that have been produced for one case. I mean, take the case for the CCR that was mentioned. I mean, Katie Gallagher and others have said, everybody is welcome to use our arguments, to use our evidence, whether it's in national jurisdictions or for international procedures, run with it. And so that's very critical. There is your speaker Shahid from Al-Haq unfortunately had to leave. I think you mentioned Al-Haq has set up, I think a week after the start of the war, a genocide working group with a signal group and about 50 or 60 members so far from all over the world that is exchanging and brainstorming collectively and exchanging information and legal arguments on sort of the use of genocide, both in the pressure on the ICC, in the lobbying with states vis-a-vis the ICJ, the under the Genocide Convention, as well as the cases in national courts. Gill, Değer is part of the group, and so are others. So anybody who is interested in that working group, please contact Susan Power of Al-Haq in Ramallah, and I'm sure she can add you. We also created a working group on forced displacement and ethnic cleansing, sort of working along similar lines. Exchanging information, organizing sort of webinars and events to work with people who are working on ethnic cleansing, and then Lawful Palestine is a coalition of young Palestinian lawyers, both in the Middle East and in North America and in Europe and beyond. They are in the process of, as part of their legal networking, of setting up this sort of legal action working group, including also with people focusing on and exchanging information on universal jurisdiction, linking to human rights organizations that have used universal jurisdiction in sort of other conflict situations. So legal networking is of critical importance under the current circumstances, and I can only encourage it, and if anybody needs information, so Al-Haq in Ramallah, Al-Quds University, the Community Action Center of Al-Quds University, Munir Nusseibeh, he's coordinating the work on forced displacement. Ihsan Adel and Hassan, what's his name, of Lawful Palestine. And you can also contact me at ARDD. We do a lot of work on sort of the networking in the legal field, with both working towards justice and accountability with respect to Palestine.
Actually, everyone's contact information is available if you want to connect, and also Ms. Lamis Deek actually shared her contact information, phone number, and email.
Yeah, please feel free to do a post webinar email so that we all have each other's emails and connections, so that we can link you to the different existing networks and involve you.
Yes, that will be a first step in the yes.
May I?
Sure.
Okay. So look, I've done this multinational work in several sectors. I've also done, national security /terrorism /sanctions in several sectors in several countries. And I've done a lot of anti-Zionist IHRA work. And, to your point, Lex and Rami, the Zionists have a very formulaic process. They take all of these complaints and the arguments, and they prepare them, and then they ship them out to armies of lawyers in every country, who are then giving a very formulaic way of launching and implementing these pro-Zionist, Israeli protective, genocidal legal arguments, legal initiatives,
legislation, quasi-legislation in the form of resolutions. And unfortunately, you know, when I began my opening statement we opened up the Geneva meeting, I said, look, you know, it's a wonderful thing that lawyers have big egos, because you need to have that big ego, especially if you're a litigator, to know how to take up space and represent and do a good job for your client. But this is a detriment when we're talking about work that is supposed to be for the purpose of Palestinian self-determination, justice, equality, what we call liberation. That this prioritizing of the self in terms of having a proprietary perspective, right? And of course, balancing the needs for confidentiality. Okay, well, we're attorneys, we can have attorney privileged communications, right? But this flow, this sharing of resources is incredibly important. There's no need. We're already under-resourced. We don't, and this is the work of governments, right? The US dispatched for 30 days in almost every ministry, any government that was looking at, in a local court, was looking at a judge potentially looking at a complaint around domestic laws, right? The US government alone, aside from the Israeli army of attorneys that operate, we don't have that. What we have is each other. And we are perfectly capable of coordinating and, yes, copy pasting, and we should be, to save those resources. So instead of beginning things from scratch on so many levels, we have some of the formula, we tailor it. One of my colleagues, who was the drafter of the Rohingya complaint, she said, here's the memo, let's begin tailoring it, right? So this coordination, I really can't underscore. Also to understand that ultimately all of this work should be the property of the Palestinian national body. Right? You know, we're not an abstraction. We're not just individual clients. We are a people. The Palestinian refugees, you know, cases around refugees and return need to come back to the fore and reprioritized in our work as well, right? We don't need to resettle Palestinians in Gaza. We need to help them return. So I'm really excited that everybody is on the same page. I think that with some repivoting and sharing of your work, Lex, I think you said in Jordan, I think our next meeting might be in Jordan, and I can keep everybody posted. Those who can't join in person can join by Zoom. And we've actually also begun working with attorneys in Jordan to start exploring the domestic sector, the regulatory administrative sector of law. And we're also very much interested in legislating as well, in helping implement legislation, no matter where it happens. But this sort of incrementalism and coordination, we believe, is quite poised, you know, with the cases that both of you have raised, Rami and Lex, quite powerfully poised to make a historic change, at bringing all of the political into the legal domain. Very important work.
Yes, thank you very much, Lamis. So let's take a last word from everyone. Of course, it's good to mention that, again, to remind how Lamis just said, that the network must be kept, and everyone can, of course, refer to the organization to get any contact information they need. So let's get a last word from each one of you, and starting with Dr. Filiz Değer. Do you have any comments at the end of this session? We can't hear you. Yes.
I think because of better right, ICJ is not solution, because taking measure by the United Nations Security Council, US for before resolution is not useful, and we are not have time. Everyday people dying, women, children. What can we do? I think we can apply ICC and give evidence for this. International Criminal Court use OTP link, you know, OTP link, and we can say people to send videos for evidence to OTP link, and we can say people this. And moral is important, and to remind people, civilians in Palestine, their right and their right of defense, and we can give moral. In Republic of Turkey, we have an organization for countering disinformation because of fake videos, and we are working here and countering fake videos about crimes. We can do that, I think, because of measures taken United Nations Security Councils. The veto is a big problem, and after ICJ, same difficulty, because of that, not because of people's rights. We can support ICC. Because of that, we can take evidence and deal with disinformation.
Sophia, your mic is off.
Yes, thank you, Filiz, there for your input. So as we're closing the discussion, so if anyone has anything to add, they're welcome.
You know, we had these discussions, and it was really a wide and broad representation. Even some organizations that historically debated with each other about which was the best tactic. And our position was all tactics, whether you're boycotting the ICC and want to get Karim Khan deposed or whatever it is, or removed, or you need to maintain those good relations. I think it's important that all tactics are used in coordination and in empowering each other. I think, you know, this is the most effective. People, I think, don't measure as much the impact that their work has on the Palestinian people en masse and the struggle and the cause. Again, I don't want to reduce it to egos. There are bigger political systems and initiatives at play beyond us and our personalities. And I think it's important that we're open to all people who are working on all arenas, whether we're hopeful and optimistic or have faith and trust in them or not, and to strengthen each other's work, whether we believe it's the best and only route or not. So yes, absolutely. Some arenas are less powerful than others, less effective than others, but work on all that we have together, inshallah.
Yes. So Professor Kovalik, do you have a last word, last comment?
Just that I welcome working with everyone on this call for the common cause of saving Palestine and Gaza. On a more kind of not as grand scale, I wonder if there's a way to have an international delegation of lawyers to go to Gaza. There have been some international delegations there, not that many. I think that could serve a useful purpose. I think having as many witnesses there as possible is important, and I'm just throwing that out as an idea.
There's no access at the moment. There's no access for foreigners, with very, very few exceptions of sort of the head of a handful of international staff of UNRWA and the head of the ICRC who got in. There are no foreign journalists in Gaza. I mean, CNN got in for a one-off 2-hour visit to Rafah, to the south of Gaza. There are zero foreign journalists. There are no aid workers. There's nobody. It's all happening, you know, especially in the north of Gaza and the center of Gaza, without any international witness presence.
But hopefully if the UNSC vote advances, maybe if there's a ceasefire or at least a pause, some...
Still very much to be seen what Israel will do then, indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Well, maybe worth at least trying to at least make a request even if it's denied, which is maybe worth doing. And again, maybe that could be answered if there is a pause. So I just throw that out, but I know there are very important logistical obstacles to that. But in any case, I'm available. I'm willing to help in any way possible on this cause. Thank you to everyone.
Thank you very much. So, Mr. Shah.
I mean, thank you all for your eagerness. I think I'm an activist personally. I'm not a lawyer, and I believe in mobilizing people, and I believe in the full liberation of my country. And I think the massacre, the genocide ended whatever form of recognition or legitimacy Israel ever had. I never recognized. But I think whatever they had is ended. I think we need to think from a different perspective on how to end this Zionist colonialism in Palestine. And definitely rephrasing our legal terminology is important. Looking at it in that sense is very important. But I think it's a war that is going to be made by people, and people, not only Palestinians, but people around the world who's recognizing the danger of this continuous assault on humanity, this continuous assault on a rule-based world. And I think we should act accordingly. I would love to coordinate with everybody based on that. And I think there's a lot to exchange that would save time, effort, and resources that are scarce.
Oh, sorry, I thought my mic was off. So when I was saying yes, you could hear me, but well, very well done. So our goal tentatively is to have a file sharing, co-training, whatever meeting, end of February, early March, ideally in person, right before Ramadan. Ideally also in Amman, we expect, maybe for a day and a half. And if people want to stay longer and continue to work together, we'll have filed some cases by then. I think, we'll have some confidentiality papers in place to protect the work and the client and maybe some sensitive contacts. But we are very anxious and excited to work with, to share with, and to learn from all the attorneys who are doing this work. Dan, to your point, one thing that we are very insistent upon is the empowerment and prioritizing of the Palestinian people, not just the Palestinian NGOs and not just the legal world, in their role in exacting accountability. This is something that has to be, I have a client who lost 61 members and he says, all I want to do is learn international law. And my position is, this is all yours. Anything we know should be yours, and you have an active role in this. And I think it's important to prioritize Palestinian attorneys on the ground in Palestine as being a legitimate, credible source and active part and leaders of this. I mean, this goes back to the three-pronged Israeli Zionist, Western Zionist war on us, which is the hyper-privileging of non-Palestinian, but really Zionist institutions and NGOs, even ones that we consider conflictual allies, the supremacy of trauma, which decreases the credibility of Palestinian testimonies and trauma, and then the criminalization, dehumanization, and marginalization of Palestinians. And by bringing Palestinians back to the center of this work, you really have a critical role to play in reversing this dehumanization, delegitimization of the Palestinian narrative and the Palestinian witness testimony. So truly, I support this and hope that we can balance it with really prioritizing Palestinian voices inside Palestine as well, and their testimonies.
Thank you very much.
Do reach out, Lamis. I'm based in Europe, but ARDD is based in Amman, employs over 40 lawyers, and their legal aid program is sort of one of the largest in the Near East. So we can definitely partner with you on this initiative. And
actually, Mr. Takkenberg, you can share now your contact information.
I copied it. I got it, and I copied it. I saved it. It's already done.
Same for you,
please
Mr.
reach
Kovalik.
out.
Yeah.
And we're also in contact with a lot of other lawyers in Jordan and in Palestine. So please reach out, and we're happy
shortly.
exchange and I think you did I understand correctly that you have been in touch with Law for Palestine as well, with Isan Ado?
Yeah, so I'm familiar with them. They're not actually practicing, at least not in the US. They issue statements, but there isn't any actual practice of law.
No, there's no practice, but there's a lot of networking. They're very they're doing great work in networking. You know, that's their strength.
Well, very good.
Wonderful.
Yes, so I'll pursue that more with Hiba. Hiba is our contact.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And thank you very much again for the opportunity. And please reach out. If we can be of support. One final idea that people have mentioned and that was not mentioned today is the idea for a people's tribunal in situations where the official systems don't work and are not likely to bring justice. A people's tribunal organized by either one or a coalition of organization, and with very prominent legal and other experts as sort of the judges, can have tremendous public impact in advancing the discourse. It was used in Vietnam, in the Vietnam War, and in a number of other instances since then, and it's definitely also a model that is worth sort of exploring further.
Yeah. Thank you all for this constructive conversation, and thank you all for the work you're doing on the ground, and hopefully you'll keep the conversation going until something concrete comes out of it. Please keep each other's contact and refer to the organization if you need any contact information. This is the end of our webinar.